So, good evening and welcome to tonight's commissioned Economy and Place Policy and Scrutiny Committee. Welcome to those in attendance and welcome to the millions watching at home, both in Great Britain and all over the world, I'm sure. Tonight is a special sort of meeting. There's a primary and sole focus on buses. Those in attendance will have seen the papers. Should say, I was hoping for a sort of more broader coverage of bus services. We haven't quite got that, but I'm sure we can still ask questions of officers and the relevant executive member, Councillor de Gorn, who are joining us this evening. We also have some guests from the York Bus Forum. So we have Flick Williams, Graham Collett, and is it Niall McFerrin?
It's a long story. I usually go with the name
Neil. Neil McFerrin. Thanks for clarifying. You can let me get it wrong once, but never again.
That's okay. Right.
Thank you. I should say as well, for clarity, there was a late paper uploaded to the sort of public documents, and this is due to what was an oversight with the Equalities Impact Assessment for the officer decision regarding the contract award for services 13 on Saturday, the 412 and the 12. That Equalities Assessment, although it was referred to in the paper, you couldn't actually click on it to view it and read it. That's now online. I appreciate, though, not great for it to only be available what was essentially a day before this meeting. So I think there'll be a limited digestion of that from those who wanted to discuss it. But we are where we are, unfortunately, but we'll make the best of it. We'll get straight into the agenda. Firstly, as ever, hi, Councillor Pearson, any declarations of interest? No? Okay, that's great. There are no public participants, but what I will be doing is allowing the bus forum guests to each have 5 minutes, if they like, to sort of say why they're here tonight and what they would like us to discuss. I can't guarantee we'll get through absolutely everything, but we'll do our best. And I guess it'd be good for you to do that. I think it might be good for you to do that now, and then we'll go into the officers' opening presentation. So I'm not sure if you have a set order in mind. I'll play to your tune.
We did accessibility issues.
Okay, cool. And I'm sure you don't need telling, just be mindful of your microphone being on or off. Cheers. Fire away.
That's it. Excellent. Okay. So good evening, everybody. Yeah, Neil McFerrin, Irish name, Yorkshire accent. Okay, where do you start with BSIP? That's really what I'm going to focus on. But I'll start with some good news. The good news is that First York have been profitable throughout the pandemic. If anybody was in any doubt that they were loss-making, no, they've been profitable. According to their published results, they're profitable. They're not hugely profitable. Don't go out and buy shares in them tomorrow, but they are profitable. And the other piece of good news was delivered by Tom Bridge, their operations director, at the last Bus Forum meeting, where he reassured us that we are actually the star performer. York has bounced back better after the pandemic than anywhere else in the first bus company world, which I think is extremely useful and valuable information when considering some of the issues that we've got here tonight. In terms of BSIP, absolutely fantastic result a year ago to have been awarded £17.36 million. On top of the other awards for Zebra that we're not talking about tonight, but on top of the other awards that we've got, a great job done by City of York Council in terms of getting the award for this money. Our concern is that, for those of you who get away from these meetings early enough to watch a bit of evening television, had you been able to watch The Apprentice last week? It's a comedy show. It's nothing to do with business, but it's The Apprentice. one of the candidates was soundly berated for having produced a business plan that she was pitching for a £250,000 investment, and her business plan was only 14 pages long. Tonight, everybody, we're looking at a business plan for a £17.3 million investment, and it's 3 pages long. What we're asking for is more detail, is more of a plan. The award was made a year ago. We should by now have a good plan of exactly how this money will be spent, what the objectives of the exercise are, what the likely outcomes of the exercise are, and how those outcomes will be measured. And so, with respect to the people here tonight, I would not regard this as a plan that, as a retired businessman, I would have recognised. And so yeah. We say in the notes to the meeting how important buses are to the City of York. And they are not just important, they are crucial. It really is no alternative to provide mass transit in the city. And importantly, they do, obviously, with the improvements to the buses, provide a significant input to the reduction of carbon and to pollution in the city. But in terms of congestion, as we said at the local plan inquiry meeting, it's no good whatsoever making all of these plans for buses if they are simply stuck in queues of private vehicles. We see nothing in the notes for tonight's meeting that tells us how that situation will be avoided. And we are looking for that as a significant outcome for this process. If buses are to work in the city, sure, punctuality is important. Sure, economical fares are important, but reliability should be the mantra. And I don't think that we can understate how important it is that we provide a reliable service. One of the issues that we have currently with one of the operators is they are running a trial program where they're running variable lengths of intervals between the bus arriving. They say that this was a computerized program that told them that this was a more efficient way to run the service, but it just adds to increasing passenger confusion, and it acts again as further deterrent. There are too many people in the city who would like to catch a bus, but are being dissuaded from catching a bus because of the poor reliability of the current service. So yeah, our desire from this process is to see a better plan for this 17.3 million. It is a huge amount of money. It is called a bus services improvement plan. It is not called a disaster recovery plan. So we need to obviously see what the improvements are going to be, how they will be measured, and ensure that whatever measures are taken, we will receive public support for. We've all been at meetings attended by people where buses are discussed. It is a subject of critical importance to the city. And so the population will support well thought out, well implemented measures. And we have within this document the money to pay for them. So thank you.
Right, thank you, Chair. I wanted to focus on two issues, really, the supported services and the enhanced partnership operation. On supported services, the council is now supporting 3 routes, 2 of which were run previously commercially by the operators. This is using BSIP money, which was meant to be used for improved services. Just as an aside, I couldn't reconcile the figures quoted in the papers for the support for routes 12, 13 and 412 with a total of 810,000 that's quoted at the end as being the total support. But I'll leave that one as it is. It's also unclear to us what level of service will be running on the number 12 or who will run it from the 1st of April, as we haven't seen that information published anywhere. There's certainly a risk that if patronage of these routes doesn't improve, the council will be forced to continue funding them at the expense of other supported services. And of course, we're now approaching, as we get towards the end of June, another cliff edge when the £2 fare support from government ceases. The number 12 route, currently run by Transdev, has had lots of cancellations. There were between 4 and 6 daily cancellations last week between Wednesday and Saturday. Publicity for the service has been poor, and tickets purchased from First York, the previous operator, were not accepted by the new operator, thus creating extra costs for regular users. Turning to other Transdev local routes that they run, 24, 25 and 26, there were a huge number of cancellations on those in the 10 days prior to Christmas, with some 3-hour gaps on several days, and this is on an hourly service. Other services were not good that were run by Transdev, including the 14. Since the new year, things have improved a bit, but most recent information I have now was that last Saturday there were 6 journeys cancelled by midday, and there were further cancellations yesterday on routes 12, 24 and 26. So I think the questions we're asking really are, what monitoring is the council undertaking of this situation, and is it adequate? Why has the council not implemented the provisions in the contracts for dealing with the issue? And why have they not sought a remediation plan in Transdev? Moving on to the Enhanced Partnership. The Bus Forum is a member of the Enhanced Partnership Forum, consisting of council members and local stakeholder representatives. We only have a representative, though, of the bus operators in attendance following a request made at the first meeting. And that representative is only able to discuss general issues and questions about the services run by his own company. There's also supposed to be a separate passenger liaison group set up, though it's unclear how this will work with the forum and avoid overlap. So I think the question we have is, can the Enhanced Partnership be truly said to work without user representation on its main committee? And finally, why is it still impossible to obtain passenger and bus reliability data from bus operators? Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Whenever you're ready, Flick.
Thank you, Chair. The agenda for tonight's meeting is not as I expected it to be, but I'll speak to the Equalities Impact Assessment, which does lead us to issues facing disabled and older bus users more widely. So firstly, last October, this council voted to adopt the social model of disability. This Equalities Impact Assessment is not consistent with that. We are disabled people. As soon as you start breaking us down into impairment categories and deciding what the needs of those groups are, you open yourselves up to overlooking many impairment groups and in effect start on a hierarchy of assumed need. You can list negative implications without ascribing them to impairment groups. Now, we all know that bus services are under huge threat as government COVID support funding comes to an end. The cliff edge has been moved forward to June, but whilst we have a bus network operated according to the profit motive against the challenge of huge inflationary costs, cuts are inevitable. What we absolutely must do, therefore, is to get on with spending other BSIP awarded funds to actually improve the infrastructure to encourage greater bus use. We have the money to improve real-time information at stops and its accessibility, which reduces digital exclusion. Every time I visit Leeds, I get bus stop envy. They are clean, well lit, with seating and plenty of room for wheelchair users, with accessible information, and have some civic pride about them. Returning to the Equalities Impact Assessment, I note that under the disability and age sections, it is stated that the reduction in numbers of concessionary pass holders is one of the reasons bus services have become less commercially viable. Well, we know that has nothing to do with price elasticity or affordability. It is established fact that these groups are travelling less, and little wonder when age and pre-existing health conditions are the major predictors of poor COVID outcome. It is an inconvenient truth, I know, but COVID is not over, and some disabled and older people know that only too well, as we are the ones who continue to protect ourselves with masks. If you are clinically vulnerable, you need not to have to share air. And it doesn't help when, as happened to me, you ask a driver to open the bus windows and the request is declined on the basis that other passengers will only close them. The current infection rate is assessed as being 100,000 new cases daily, but you have to search for information now, which makes it even harder to manage your own personal risk. My bus use continues to reduce as hostility towards those wearing masks increases, combined with buses becoming less and less reliable, a vicious circle. But I have volunteered to be part of the Enhanced Partnership subgroup to discuss these issues further. And on that point, the final part of the EQIA, section 8.1, how will the impact of your proposal be monitored and improved upon going forward? We read the Enhanced Partnership will include a forum for stakeholders and passenger groups, bus user engagement events, a passenger liaison group, etc., etc. The Bus Forum very much appreciates this opportunity to speak to this scrutiny meeting, but with the greatest of respect, this last section suggests to me that it is always groups like us doing more and more of the heavy lifting. I don't pretend that any of this is easy with limited resources, but we already know what makes for a good and sustainable bus network. Clean, regular, reliable, accessible buses with the ability to wait for them, provided with accessible real-time information under shelter in maximum comfort and safety. Our inbox is full of increasingly angry emails about buses that don't show, with long wait times for the next when there is decreased frequency. What we need is for bus operators to be held to their service obligations, or else those with the choice will opt for car use instead, and those without the choice only become more socially isolated, excluded and disadvantaged. As we embark upon consultation for LTP4, to my mind, the transport challenges and carbon reduction targets of this city can only be solved by mass transit solutions, and yet sadly we appear to be headed at some speed in the opposite direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Flick, and to the rest of you, those really helpful opening statements. I think they'll inform the discussion, and of course, when we go into the discussion, please feel free to speak as much as the councillors do. If the officers in the room and perhaps the executive member, I'm not quite sure, want to give a brief verbal summary of the papers presented, and then we can go into questions, that'd be grand.
Thank you and good evening. The government in 2019 set out a national bus strategy, and the national bus strategy was actually published by the government back in March of 2021. And this set out a vision and opportunity to deliver better bus services for passengers across England. One of the outputs of the national bus strategy was the development of a bus service improvement plan, and local authorities to make decisions around whether to take over a franchising model or to follow an enhanced partnership model in order to deliver bus services for their communities. The BSIP set out a vision for York in which bus services are inclusive, accessible to all, efficient, complementary to other strategies, attractive to use, welcoming, a source of pride to the city and its residents, and a network which provides a wider connection to the Yorkshire region, providing opportunities for people to go beyond York and to link to other cities around. And there are 6 strands within the strategy: maintaining our assets, actively managing traffic to keep buses running on time, tackling bottlenecks, improving whole corridors, managing services in the city centre, and looking to reduce journey times and improve ticketing and offer ticketing incentives to attract particularly young people onto services. The bus service improvement plan, which was approved by the executive in 2021, is a 52-page document which sets out all of these objectives in some detail. And that document was provided to the DfT in order to seek funding from them as part of a national assessment of bus services across the 75 local authority transport authorities in the UK. They came back to all operators in April of 2022 with indicative announcements around funding. And at that time, of the over 75 transport authorities, 35 received some indicative funding from the DfT. The DfT set a number of criteria on the local authority at that time in order to secure this funding. And one of those was obviously the governance of the BSIP. And the governance of the BSIP is to be done through the Enhanced Bus Partnership. The Enhanced Bus Partnership was put out to consultation both with operators and to the public during the course of 2022. And the executive approved entering into that in September of October. Let me just check that date. I believe September of October of 2022. The establishment of the Enhanced Bus Partnership at that point enabled the release of the BSIP funding from the DfT. So whilst it was recognised that we had an announcement of funding in April of 2022, actually we secured no funding until the latter half of the year. In fact, to late November 2022, when actually the funding was released formally to the authority. And at that point, we set around looking at the strategy in detail and how we would deliver that. And the funding is released in annual tranches. And one of the elements that we needed to ensure to release the funding for the next financial year was ensure we had a detailed plan of delivery. That detailed plan.
We knew we were getting the.
Can I chip in there, Chair?
Now you're asking nicely, yeah.
We knew we were getting the funding in April, but you're saying we only really started to look at what we're going to do with it in September or October?
The funding in April was an indicative amount of which the DfT said it was subject to final clarification.
Oh, so it
they
might
could have
not have
withdrawn-
come
They
through.
could have withdrawn
Okay.
all of that funding at that point.
Right,
If
thank you, that clarifies that.
Sorry. That's the train of thought. Okay, so obviously we received funding in the November. We set around and we need to secure the funding for future years to work forward. We have worked diligently to develop a detailed programme, and what's contained in the paper tonight is a summary of that detailed programme. The programme looks at the ability to deliver. It looks at the funding profile. It looks at the linkage to other schemes being delivered across the city, and looks at how we can engage with stakeholders and contractual elements before we can go into full delivery of each project. So behind the very highlighted report provided here tonight, there is a very detailed Gantt chart which goes through it line by line in terms of how we will actually go around delivering the programme of this project. And that has been discussed with the Department of Transport, who clearly we need to have agreement of with everything we take forward, and has been presented to the operational delivery group of the Enhanced Bus Partnership in order to ensure that we've got a buy-in from all parties to take that forward. Some of the key elements we've already worked on delivery are we have secured the reopening of Hopton Park and Ride, which was a key ask of the BSIP, and that will be reopening on the 1st of April this year. And we should be seeing a lot of publicity coming out from First in relation to that very shortly, including some for certainly people around the Poppleton area, some transport ticket incentives to get people back onto that. But clearly we recognise also within BSIP that actually reopening and having a big publicity rise isn't the answer to everything there. And we need to work really hard to get people back onto the Park and Ride across the city, and particularly in Poppleton, to re-establish itself, coming from a position where we haven't been having passengers there for the last 3 years. So it's really important that we work really hard with First, who are the operators at that site, to secure things going forward. The BSIP itself is split into two key elements. We have a capital spend and a revenue spend. The capital is focused on looking at improving bus services across the city. We have 3 key corridors which the DfT have looked to fund on this. One is Wigington Road, which clearly picks up the hospital and some of the issues we've had around there recently. Holford Road, and also looking at Heslington Road. We also have a very detailed study to look at the city centre and the congestion issues that affect that. Because clearly the city centre is where all of our routes tend to congregate as it passes through there. And it also affects bus services coming into the city from East Yorkshire and from North Yorkshire, which are all trying to get close to this station to interchange. So I think it's vital that we look at all the sort of reliability issues in the city centre and how we can secure improvements there. And we currently have consultants commissioned to look at that, and they are working through that at the moment, and obviously we're engaging with stakeholders as they develop that scheme. Alongside that, through the revenue scheme, we are looking to support bus services, and picked up with that at the beginning of the meeting. We have done short-term tenders and supported services for the last 3 months on the 12, 13 and 412. And as is picked up in the addendums to these papers, we have now awarded a long-term contract for the next 2 years, utilising funding within the BSIP to support these services going forward. But it's, sorry.
I'm just going to come in as well, just to address the point that was made. They're not being supported at the expense of others. No. So there is an ability to stop those with 3 months' notice if needs be, if the council is in a position where it can't afford to support all the bus services it currently does. We have got flexibility within the contracts to take stock, pause, and consult obviously with the executive about which services it does want to subsidise. So they are not at the expense of others. We can afford it at the moment. We can afford all the bus subsidy we've got for the next 2 years of basic funding that we've got confirmed. But there will be some decisions to make potentially, but we have got flexibility in those contracts, just to clarify.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, but obviously one of the keys, we are working hard with the new operator already. We've had some conversations with them around monitoring usage, and clearly we want them to do significant publicity around the 12. I think one of the things with the short term, that was quite difficult to do. We need to make sure going through the longer term, what we need to do is part of the BSIP objective, which is to return people back to the bus. And I think that has to be a core thing. It has to be a core theme of everything we're doing in BSIP and through the enhanced partnership, that we are returning people back to the bus. The bus industry has been through a torrid time. COVID decimated it, and I think without government support, it would have collapsed in its entirety. Clearly, that position has stabilised. And one of the things we brought back to the executive in December of this year was around stabilisation of the bus network. And in many ways, we can see that that has been successful. The BSIP funding and the work we are doing with the enhanced partnership has helped us stabilise the network. And as we saw coming towards the previous end of government support at the end of March, when we would have expected, prior to a notification it was going on to June, but just around about that time, we would have expected operators to advise us that services were being withdrawn, as we had seen happening in the October and the previous cliff edge had been approaching. But actually at that point, the stabilisation seems to have occurred. Operators are telling us that they have much better driver availability. Doesn't mean they've returned to pre-COVID levels, but they've certainly plateaued themselves. They were replacing drivers that were and they were losing them as rapidly. But now we have a stabilisation in the driver market. Clearly, there's still work to be done there. We have a stabilisation in the number of services operating, in that we've seen very few changes proposed for this March, April period. And we're working hard with the operators through the enhanced partnership to make sure we keep a very careful eye on what that happens going forward. One of the things that also BSIP and working with the Department of Transport require us to do is really detailed monitoring and evaluation of all of the BSIP funding. So we are currently working with the ITS at Leeds, the Institute of Transport Studies. They're going to support us on really detailed monitoring and evaluation of the BSIP as it goes forward. And that will look at many factors. And alongside that, we need to report on a quarterly basis to the DFT in terms of whether we are meeting the objectives of BSIP. So clearly monitoring and evaluation to ensure we're getting value for the money we're spending, and we are delivering in what is a really ambitious programme, are absolutely vital to ensure the city and the bus users and the prospective bus users, because I think it's really important that we get people who aren't using the bus back onto the bus. And I know we haven't come tonight to talk about Zebra, but Zebra is another key element in terms of getting people back onto the bus. The delivery of high quality new electric buses into the city is going to be a big improvement to passenger experience. And that alongside with looking at reliability issues, improving the access to bus stops, improving the bus stop environment, we see as all very key. We have an investment in real-time information screens. The first of those will be delivered in June. There have been discussions with members around where likely locations will be. Clearly, the new screens bring forward the opportunity to have a battery-powered screens, which means we haven't got the delays in terms of getting power supplies and the costs of getting power supplies to bus stops. We can locate them at locations where we couldn't previously do that. They come with the ability for announcements and a push button, and we've been trialling those in a number of areas, and I'd be really interested on feedback on them. I know a number of councillors have given me some feedback around volumes and such like, but I think it's really important that we understand we've put these screens in. Are they in a position where people can view them, particularly people with any accessibility issues? Are they in a position where the push button is correct so that people can actually press the button and it's visible, etc.? So I think there are many points that we need to make sure we draw out of discussions with people through the various forums we have on the enhanced partnership, but also working with the bus forum. I think it's really important. But I think it's really important also we reach out wider. One of the things that we need to do through the enhanced partnership is reach out to a much wider group. As I picked up earlier in my presentation, one of the things that we are looking to do is really target young people. It's going to be really important to reach out to young people and understand what will get them onto the bus in bigger numbers, not just fares, but what else attracts them, what do they want to do, what sort of a passenger experience do they get. So we need to really work with a wide group of people. We need to reach out, and I know some of the work that the council are doing on engaging with the transport strategy, they are looking to reach more difficult to reach groups, and we will be looking to piggyback partly on the back of that where we can, in order to make sure we are also reaching those groups. So I think we need to reflect that York is well placed in what is a really difficult time for the bus industry. It has come through COVID. Fortunately, we still have a bus industry in York, and we still have the network that we had, although not necessarily at the frequency we want. And we recognise that that is a remaining challenge. Fortunately, we have secured the BSIP funding, and now we need to work really hard to deliver it. As I say, we've got a very detailed programme that we will work with all parties to deliver. But I think it's really important to go forward from there.
Just going to cover two points mentioned by public speakers. So bus priority measures are within the plan. So getting buses through the traffic, I agree with the bus forum on that. That is key to that, and there are bus priority measures within that, within the BSIP. And the only other thing I was going to address was when you do a public procurement, you go through a standstill period after you've awarded the contract, which allows both parties to go, one of us has changed our mind. We certainly were, I think we still are in that period, which is why we haven't announced the operator. But as soon as we're out of that period, we obviously will be announcing it.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Michael, for that opening presentation. Do any members or guests want to raise any questions to start with? We're going to have a few tonight. I have to be quite hot on my notes. I think I've got Dave Taylor first, Kilbane, Councillor Kilbane, were you on? Councillor Cuthbertson, Councillor Hook, Councillor Daubney, and Flick, sorry. Hey, and Councillor Pearson. God, you might have to bear with me with this list. Be careful with your supplementaries. All right, Councillor Dave Taylor first.
Right, I won't do any supplementaries. And I start by confessing that in 30 years of living in York, nearly 30 years, I've only been on a bus twice. But I do think that, I know, but I live sufficiently close to the city centre that I can walk or cycle in. I do recognise how important buses are to York and to the population of York, and to our plans to reduce traffic congestion. So I appreciate that we've got this money. I appreciate that we have a plan. I do hope that that detailed plan can be shared with the bus forum, because I think that might be valuable for them to have an input into it as well. I recognise the fact that we've lost bus patronage due to COVID. That's understandable. And Flick makes the point that people who are most vulnerable to COVID are the people who are now less likely to want to go on a bus, and COVID is still with us. So I also appreciate what you just said, Michael, about wanting to target other markets, to go after younger people, to get them to use the buses. And this brings me to my question. When I used to work in the sort of entertainment industry in the city centre, a number of people said to me, we would like to come and see a film or go to the theatre or eat out at a restaurant in the evening, but we can't come in on a bus and go back on the bus because the park and ride is closed in the evening. Do we have a plan to do something to overcome that?
So, yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was something I didn't actually mention in my presentation. So one of the elements that is in BSIP is effectively turning the park and ride sites into effectively a multimodal hub. So rather than being really completely dedicated to park and ride, which still remains a key core element of their sale and what they bring to the city and the bus industry and the passengers, we're looking to open those up so that other services can actually interchange at the park and ride site. So particularly coming in from Cotmanthorpe and such like, there's a possibility for services to interchange at Aston Bar and offer people a wider opportunity of connection. So you can get a park and ride out of the city and then interchange to a service going out of the city to other locations or vice versa. But also look to the park and ride to become an opportunity for longer stay parking. So not just that it is available for parking by people utilising the park and ride on a daily basis, but actually you can use it for going on train journeys, you can use it for visiting the city over weekends. But become more like airport parking with a short, medium, long-term secure parking availability on that site, but also the interchange to walking, cycling, use of the tier scooters, that type of thing. So to really make them an opportunity for people to select the mode they want to use, with park and ride remaining at the core of it, but the opportunity to offer a much bigger sale from those very big sites that we've got, which are strategically placed around the city, and offer a great opportunity for such an interchange to take place, reducing traffic coming into the central core. So we're working really hard. Obviously, we are effectively the landlords of each of those sites, and with First, who currently operate the park and ride, being the tenants, and we need to work really closely with those. But also, the park and ride contracts will be coming up in the next year to 2 years, and we're currently looking at how they can be reevaluated to reflect the changes we want to see. And there's something which I really appreciate. The DfT are really interested in how we can deliver those. Just to add, we did have the DfT bus reform team visit us here in York. I think picked up that in report. They came to visit us in February. We took them on a tour of the city. They met with some councillors. They met with bus operators. They met with the sustainable transport team here and the wider transport team at the council. And they are really impressed by what we've done to date. They recognise the challenges that we've got in the city and the challenges we've got to deliver what we have here and the funding that we have. But actually, they're really positive about what York can do. And I think, that is a really, we as a city should be really proud that the DfT are reflecting on what York already have. It's not all great. I fully appreciate that. But we have an opportunity to make improvements, and we've got to work really hard to make those happen and to give a much better opportunity for the people of the city and people visiting to utilise public transport as a core element of travelling around.
Thank you, Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report. Just a couple of openers for me for clarification, if we can. In the main report on section 9, I think there's a typo, but it looks as though it could be significant. So at the end of section 9, it says York made it, and these are all hanging. So if you could clarify what York made it refers to. And also in agenda supplement 1, point 34, the £810,000 that is required for to maintain base service levels. If you could explain to us how that's arrived at, and I'm struggling to find where the 1.4 million BSIP network support funding is in the main table on the report on page 6 of the main report in 25. I'm struggling to see where that's come from, and I'm assuming that when these bids were made, that obviously it wasn't thought that we'd need to be maintaining services to this level, because it would have been, we didn't know what the outcomes of COVID was going to be, and when bids were first started to be thought of, we wouldn't know what's going to happen. So if we've got 810,000 that's been put into supporting the network, have we lost anything from the original plans because of that. And if you can just give us some clarification on where those numbers are coming from, that would be good.
Yeah, sorry for that typo in paragraph 9. Effectively, it made its enhanced bus partnership, which is the terminology which the DfT used to define that you've actually got to a position where you have it in operation in the city. So what it means there is that we've made our enhanced bus partnership at that date.
Is there a reason why it's in capitals?
Just
Only a bit of the terminology.
Yes.
I don't think any normal person would write it in that way.
In terms of the bus service support, that is contained on line 6 of the table. It's contained on line 6 of the table. So it talks about development of a core network, including the city centre shuttle. The funding that we've been using to support the services there is in that element of the funding. At the time between the indicative announcement of BSIC funding from the DfT and the final award in November of 2022, the DfT asked each transport authority whether they wish to utilise any of the funding identified in that line of our BSIC ask in terms of bus support to any network support where they may be having problems on the network at this time. And we had indicated to the DfT that we would like to use that funding if we needed to support services. And obviously, as has transpired, that actually was the correct action to take, because clearly we have then seen bus services which the commercial operators have returned. And in order to sustain the network across the city, we have had to step in as the Transport Authority to subsidise those services. So we hoped not to use any of it, although the DfT allowed us to do that within our allocation. But clearly, we need to ensure that we manage that, we monitor it going forward. And as James picked up, we do have a 3-month contract termination on each of those contracts. And should we see that we get the market conditions where really we could return those to a commercial operation, then I think we should actively seek to do that. We shouldn't just assume that we will continue through the full 2-year contract. We should be monitoring these really carefully, which we will, to ensure that we can return them to commercial operation and get the passenger numbers back. And that has to be a core element of the work we're doing. Is that all of your?
Well, sort of. I assumed it was to do with development of the core network, even though this wasn't the intention when the bid was initially submitted. I'm just struggling to see what adds up to 1.4 million in any of those lines, if you add them together, and also where the 810,000 comes from in terms of maintaining the base service levels, because I can't, from the other figures that we've got in here, I can't get anything to add up to 810 either. And my maths isn't great, but I think, I can do those kind of sums.
They come to 1.35 in the table. I would have to go away.
Sorry, what are you adding up?
800,000 in 22-23, 500,000 in 23-24, and 235,000 in 24-25, which gives us a total 1.35 million across the city at that time. Apologies if that number doesn't quite transpire. In terms of the ask for the operation of the base level service on the number 12, that is based on the weekly rate, which was provided by each operator at tender stage, and obviously multiplying that up across the 2 years of the contract. So at this point, it indicates that we would, over the 2 years, required to maintain the base level service on the number 12, be required to fund that by £810,000. Now, clearly, that could change. That is the number at the start. That's what we need to ring fence to protect that service. But clearly, that based on that weekly amount by the tendered service contracts is the figure we have. What's the question?
Yeah, sort of. I guess it's, though, to me, those figures from 22 to 25 are adding up to 1.535 million. But the 810 is just for taking 2 years of that 3-year funding. Is that what you're saying?
Well, sorry. I mean, just to pick up it, yes, so we have 17.35 million for the full period of the BSIP. Obviously, some of that funding came late in terms of only in the last 3 months of 22-23. Obviously, it's in this financial year. So we have already agreed with the DfT to roll that funding forward into the forthcoming years. So effectively, you know, we've allocated some of that funding already, but we've still got some funding to roll forward into 23-24 to actually spend. And that is reflected in the BSIP programme that we've developed to deliver and of which the DfT have accepted.
So I think to come back to your question, Councillor Gordon, as well, sorry, it's been a long day. Where the day started. Come back to your question, Councillor Cobain. The 810,000 is the cost of supporting those bus services. If you assume the budget is 1.4 million, that leaves 600k left of the 1.4.
Just struggling to wonder why we'd assume the budget was 1.4 million when it's clearly 1.535 here.
Because that's the element of it that we've ring fenced with the DfT to support services and kept some back for improvements. So what's the so if you actually look at that line of the table, sorry, it reflects that it can be used for other things. So not only it helps us to develop our core network, including the city centre shuttle. So at the moment, some of that funding is held back for those elements. So we've ring fenced an element of this BSIP funding with the DfT to support services. We haven't allocated all of that funding. We've ring fenced some of it back at this stage.
Okay, so there's detail that's not in the report. So what you're holding that money back for example?
It is identified in that it includes the city centre shuttle, but we haven't identified the exact amount in that table.
Well, if you add, the city centre shuttle takes it up to 600k. Well, we've still got another 100 and something thousand left that's kind of floating around somewhere.
I would have to go back and look at the base number. I'm sorry, I just can't give you that answer here. But we have certainly allocated everything that is allowed within the BSIP funding. So the full 17.35 is allocated and is ring fenced to the appropriate elements within the DfT's pass.
Okay, thanks.
Can I just say now?
But I would like this committee to have accurate reports for us to discuss, actually. You know, we are floundering around in the dark here with figures. Not surprising given the length of the report and the time that we've had to look at them, but you know, there's just clearly not enough detail in here.
Thanks, Councillor Kilbane. Can we have an answer to his queries in writing to all members, not just me and a couple of others, and we'll pass that on to the guests as well. And we can make it public on the website too. It can go in the minutes, technically.
No.
Right, okay. Well, we'll find a way of making it the answer public. Yeah, I've still got a long list of people. Councillor Cuthbertson.
Thank you, Chair. I've just going back to something that Mr. Howard said earlier on. We're talking about random intervals between bus arrivals or randomly based services because they were arguably more efficient. Or were you being ironic when you said?
So that was the comment you made in relation to a trial from one operator about varying times. Is that correct, Councillor Cuthbertson? You after more information on that?
Yeah, that's fine. So in order to stabilise the network based on the driver shortage that companies have been experiencing, in order to maintain the network as far as we could, the operators approached us in terms of revising their timetables, which clearly took them slightly off the clock face detail to this, what you describe as a more sort of flexible delivery of the service. Now, that has maintained quite often a 3, maybe where we'd had a bus service of 4, we now got a bus service of 3 in order to operate at the frequency based on the driver availability. So I do understand that people do find that confusing, but clearly as part of the process to stabilise the network, we've ensured that the bus service frequency is maintained where it may have been at the compromise to some of the timing issues.
That's purely in terms of driver supply, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
I mean, it's a supply side problem that's being solved, not a customer side problem.
It is a supplier issue in terms of driver
Yeah,
shortages.
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just wondering what value that approach is in a plan that's going to have some years to achieve success. When, for instance, I declare an interest in that I live on the number 5 bus route, which is inherently unreliable, but that's another matter. So if you build that unreliability in terms of timing, because you've mentioned punctuality, reliability, and several of the points on page 5, I think it is, particularly for our, I'm going to put it, members of the population who have some struggle to like make a predictable timetable on their own. All I'm asking is, is that going to be the basis of the timetable, or are you moving to a fixed and regular timetable such as is mentioned in other parts?
I think one of the key things is that these have been actions as a result of consequence, either driver shortage, reduction in patronage, etc. We continue to monitor the network closely.
Right.
I think, as I said, in terms of the number 12, really, it's very much in relation to growing numbers back. One of the objectives of BSIP is to get people back onto the bus.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, if we can get people back onto the bus, we will be seeking with the operators to really get frequencies back. So whilst I recognise that at the moment there is a compromise and it's not ideal from some passengers' point of view, what is important is that we monitor that and we are working with the operators to return to a more regular timetable as quickly as possible.
Can I ask then, you've got some figures in, is it 18 on page 5? 18A on page 5, which is 2018-19 figures. How do we see these improving in 1920, 2021, 22, 23, and in the financial year that we're about to start?
These pick up the pre-COVID numbers. So that was the last sort of normalized year that we had in terms of passenger numbers. Passenger numbers in York decreased through COVID significantly and have yet to return back to the pre-COVID levels. Now, that is due to many factors which have led to a change in patronage.
I realise that, but the question I'm trying to ask him, maybe it's a less than tactful question, is how are we doing in terms of return to normality?
So at the moment, we're around about 85%. It does vary across services. Some services are performing much better than others.
In my experience, reaching for the service that you require from even a good way along the route to achieving it is actually the route that costs most time and most effort.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. Getting from 85% to 100% is going to be a challenge. But to a certain extent, it's not going to go back to how it was, because the way we all move and change has changed as a result of COVID as well. So I think we've got to sort of not just look at it as how do we go back to how we were, but what does the future look like and how do we make sure the bus is central and really part of that. I think just going back to the timetable changes a little bit, some of those changes are to commercial services. So when a commercial operator says, I want to flex the timetable, the council faces a choice of going, yes, or we'll start funding it. And that's the reality of the way the bus market generally operates, which is a mixture of subsidised services and not just subsidised by the council. Some parish councils contribute, the university contributes to bus services, for instance, against some that are purely commercial, and that flexing and what the council requires has to be sort of balanced with what we want to fund or can afford to fund as well.
I think my point, Chair, is that it would be nice to have some indication as to what normality might look like, and roughly when we might expect to achieve it. I realise that the timetables will change, but presumably there's some kind of forecast for the number of years that it will take to run the service to achieve that, or am I being totally naive?
So the BSIP sets a number of objectives which we've signed up to the DFT with, and clearly part of that monitoring and evaluation process is to make sure we achieve those. So we are looking to grow the network. It's quite ambitious in terms of patronage. So clearly we need to not only get back to 100%, but we want to surpass 100% and provide a significant increase over and above that. So part of BSIP is not just about this stabilisation and return to normality, but it is about getting more people onto the buses.
I do appreciate that, Chair. All I'm asking is, over what period of time do we anticipate this might happen?
So the BSIP programme is up until March of 2025. So that is that's the target date for return. But obviously there may be some lapse, and obviously the monitor is a little behind, so we wouldn't get that data.
We'll take that as an initial target then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, councillor Cuthbertson. I've got a supplementary thing from Neil and then councillor Kilbane. Thanks for waiting. Oh, a totally new one. Well, you okay? I put you at the bottom of the line. Thanks, Kilbane. Councillor Kilbane. That's going to become a nickname. Sorry, Neil. Fire away.
Thank you, Chair. Just in support of Councillor Cuthbertson's comment, in actual fact, first we're discussing this as the last bus forum meeting, and they have agreed that if it is not something which is favourable, shows in favour with the passengers, then they will revert to the normal clock face schedules for their bus timetable. And so we will be making representations to first to say that no, we are not getting support amongst the passengers for this new scheme. And as a further supplementary, of course, obviously, we have a target of 150% over base to achieve by the end of this decade in terms of bus patronage, which is achievable, and we will give all the support we possibly can to anybody and everybody to get to that number.
Thank you, Neil. I've got councillor Hook next. Thanks for waiting.
Thank you. I'll try and get it all done in one go because I've got to go. So first thing on reliability, the number 10 bus which goes through Poppleton is the one that's not got the clock face timetable. It's been extended from every half hour to anything from 35 to 48, 50 minutes. I actually put round a leaflet to let everyone know when to expect a bus, and that was appreciated. And I also mentioned in that, please use it or lose it on the grounds that that's what we were told. You've got to use the buses or not. And I immediately got comments from people saying, well, we went there and we used the timetable and we sat and waited and we waited and we waited and 2 buses were cut. So I'm never going to use the bus again. That's what they've told me. And that's just really unfortunate. And of course, when buses are cancelled, when it's 45 minutes, it's a heck of a lot longer to wait than back in the good old days when it was only a quarter of an hourly bus service. And you could live with that, especially if you've got commitments, catching trains, etc. So that's one thing that people need to realise. If you keep extending the periods between buses, it's a vicious circle. You get fewer passengers, so you extend the periods, so you get fewer passengers, and you haven't have a bus at all, but except you desperately need it. The other thing is the hospital buses now, we've been told, is going, which is a real terrible thing, because back in the days before it was invented, I used to park at Clifton Moor and other people used to, and use the number 6 as a park and ride to the hospital. But now there's a 2-hour parking limit in Clifton Moor for some totally unknown reason, because it's never full. And I wondered if the council could work with the Clifton Moor people to try and get them to get rid of that stupid restriction, so that then people could, again, with no hospital bus, use the number 6 as a park and ride service. Or else, are we going to fight to get the hospital bus? And I know one of the reasons why people weren't using the hospital bus was because the hospital's not being very cooperative, so the hospital bus couldn't even get to the hospital, which is totally disastrous. And finally, have you got scope within this BSIP to think of brand new ideas? Because York is changing. Not everyone wants to go to the middle. People want to go to Clifton Moor, Monk's Cross, places other ways, so really round the city. Now, I know that having park and rises interchanges, would that mean that you're getting buses that would link the city round the periphery? And also, I love Poppleton Bar reopening, that's fantastic. But could that not be an interchange hub as well? That's it.
quite a bit there.
So, yeah, I think we recognise that any service that's missed, so any cancellation or whatever notice it's given is not something that we want. And reliability is an absolute key to delivering this. And this is something which we, through the enhanced partnership and through working with operators, both on the commercial and on the subsidised routes, are absolutely focused on ensuring that this doesn't happen. And we know that some routes have been suffering more than others from cancellations. We actually monitor the cancellations in terms of lost mileage. So in terms of where we have subsidised services, it's reflected in terms of the mileage that the actual operator is delivering. So that may make a slightly different reflection to actual cancellation in terms of a service number, because it's about the overall total lost mileage over a monthly period. So that's the way that we actually monitor it. That's the way the contracts are awarded. As I say, any service missed is not what we want to be seeing. And where we have been seeing services missed, we are picking those up with the operators and we're looking for recovery plans for them. So we're actually saying to them, if you have a problem, what actually is your problem? Is it vehicle related? Is it driver related? Is it something on the network that's causing a problem? And each of those, we are working with them on a recovery plan in terms of what can we do, what can they do, and what can we do to support them in doing that within what we can do as a local authority. So that is something that we are working on constantly with the operators and something which we are looking to deliver all of the time. And hopefully we'll see some of those bringing improvements quite shortly to the network. So that's one of the things in terms of we're doing. In terms of the hospital bus service, obviously that is a contract between First and the NHS Trust, York Hospitals NHS Trust. It isn't a service which we operate as a City of York Council. We understand the concerns that people have had. We have told the hospital of those concerns, and I know that there have been a number of petitions in relation to that. We understand they are looking at a number of initiatives, which is obviously within their remit to decide upon and how they actually deliver those. So at this point, I'm not in a position to respond because I don't know what they are myself, but clearly through our discussions with them, we know that they are looking at a number of initiatives. Sorry, I can't comment on the Clifton Moor parking. It's something I have to refer to our parking manager. I've certainly made a note of that to discuss that. Clearly, that's a private car park, and we would need to work with the landlord and the operator in terms of how that is done, in terms of how that works for their own business model and operation of their own site. But clearly, it's something we could open a discussion with the parking manager with. Does that pick up? Oh, in terms of the operating services with the multimodal hubs, clearly one of the key core elements is the core sustainability of the network, ensuring that everyone has access to a bus. Now, that may not be at the frequency we all want at the moment, but clearly maintaining the network is core to what we need to do. And then we can look to grow that and to bring it back to increase passenger numbers and back to where people would like a service at. But clearly that relies on people getting back onto the bus. So clearly through our behaviour change work, which we will do as part of the BSIP, through marketing campaigns related to initiatives and with operators, we will be looking at those going forward. Initiatives such as the tap on, tap off fares, the multi-operator tap on, tap off, which means that rather than just tap with one operator, you'll be able to have a multi-fare, and within the background, the fares will be reallocated and apportioned to the operators. We're working with Transport for the North in delivering that. That's quite a core thing. And Transport for the North are looking to deliver that across the north of England at the moment, and to deliver that back office to support us doing that. And obviously core to that will be ensuring the operators feel they're being fairly treated within any reapportionment, and that there aren't errors accruing, because clearly a 1p error at some point in a day could accrue to a significant amount of money. So we need to make sure that they are on board and have a trust in any system that we introduce. In terms of those multimodal hubs, clearly once we've got the stability of the network, we want to work with operators, look at where we can expand the network. But clearly the focus at the moment is to get those hubs up and running, and then we can look to expand out of those as and when opportunities arise.
I think obviously the ideal solution is that commercial operators utilise them as hubs as well. So it's not all about council funding, but actually if they're available for commercial operators to run their services through, then that's obviously a benefit to us. So, you know, using the park and ride in reverse to drive to it and catch the bus to Leeds from the park and ride obviously makes a certain amount of sense. It was actually something that DFT, when they were here last month, were very excited about, the way we were sort of seeing the development of park and ride as a multimodal hub and a regional resource rather than just something about people coming in.
Councillor de Graan.
So supplementary to the question about reliability, I mean, I think fundamentally that is key to the confidence of people using and returning to using buses. And you mentioned about working with the operators on a recovery plan. I'm just thinking on the railways now, whenever a train is delayed, there's an announcement that explains it's because of a cat on the line, or there's overhead, whatever the reason is. Can we actually ask the operators to have something along those lines, or even if it was a weekly report that explains on their website the issues that they're facing? I appreciate they don't all necessarily want to volunteer every last detail of the problems they're facing, but given the daily reports that I've been receiving about the number 12 route, I think the people who are using that route or expecting to rely on that route would expect some sort of explanation from the operator and from us, or at least reassurance from us that we are requiring a recovery plan from the operator.
Yes, so I absolutely agree with you. The reliability of services and non-cancellations is absolutely key to getting people's trust back into the buses. One of the key elements of BSIP is rolling out further real-time information screens across the network with announcements, and the new electric buses are also arriving will bring announcements relating to services and to stop frequencies, etc., onto the buses as they're rolled out in late 23-24. The real-time information screens are absolutely key to getting passenger information on the reliability of services. And we have been working really hard with the operators over the last 3 months to make sure, because they provide the information onto those screens, we've been working really hard with them to make sure that information is up to date and that no ghosting of services is happening, where a service appears on the timetable, then it says it's coming in 10 minutes, then it vanishes. So we're working really hard with them to make sure they are inputting reliable information into that database based on the GIS system, which picks up the bus location, and working with the interface. I know we did have a couple of small software problems, and they've now been resolved relating to those screens, but that's all been picked up. So there was a little period where some of those were unreliable. We now feel that that's been addressed. We work with the operators to get that information. And I think it's also important to note that some operators are much more transparent in their cancellations than maybe some of the others, using use of Twitter, etc., to social media platforms to actually get that information out there. And as I say, some of those operators are more reliable, which makes it much easier to see where the cancellations are and to track them, which is useful for users, but obviously it can reflect also badly on them in that they are giving it a really reliable track of what's happening. And I'm not pointing any fingers, but some operators are less reliable at doing that. And that is something we need to work through in the enhanced partnership to make sure that is addressed. So through the enhanced partnership, we're working really hard to minimize that impact and to make sure we have got that reliability into the network. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I come to your supplementary, Councillor Kilbane, Graham, was yours a supplementary on this sort of discussion area, or was it a brand new question?
Just a quick supplementary.
Yeah, fire away then.
On cancellations. I think monitoring when you've got all these cancellations, just in terms of lost mileage, is not really very satisfactory. I think you need to actually be looking at what's actually happening. And I think the operator, and we've met with Transdev, the operator is sort of looking at the bottom line and saying, well, if it's only that percentage, what does it matter? That seems to be their attitude. And so, focusing on that as the only way of monitoring it, I don't think is adequate, really. I think it needs to be a much more detail. I mean, the information is available on their website. You can get, we do regular monitoring ourselves, and something like that needs to be done. And when it comes to information about why there are cancellations, if the operator's not providing it, okay, if it's a commercial service, perhaps the council doesn't have much control, but if the council's funding it, surely it should be saying to the operator, well, we need that information. It should be provided as part of the contract.
Yeah. I mean, that seems reasonable. I don't want to sound naive or flippant, but is that something we can do or try to do? Or
so obviously, in terms of the contracts we've got the terms and conditions of those contracts, and we need to abide by those in terms of how we apply any operational assessment of the performance of an operator. So in terms of the contracts we have with operators, they do reflect on lost mileage, and clearly in terms of any penalty we can apply, that is the penalty term we have within the contract that we can apply. We can't use any other measurement because that wouldn't be within the terms of the contract, and they would say that you're not complying with the terms. So in terms of the contracts, we have lost mileage. I understand the point around actual cancellations, and clearly if you get a series of them together, it may reflect not as a lot of lost mileage, but clearly if you're a user and your bus has not come for 3 hours, that isn't an acceptable situation, and we fully accept that. And part of the EP is a performance group where the operators are brought to account. Clearly the EP is still a new, I think we need to reflect on this. The EP is something quite new. It only really formed at the end of October as the DSIT funding arrived, and we're working hard to roll out all of the meetings of those groups to get the proper engagement. And there is a lot of interface between those groups where they need to feed between each other, and that is something we're working really hard. We are going to employ a enhanced partnership officer to ensure that we get that all joined up going forward. So clearly the delivery of the enhanced partnership is key to working on the performance as well as other factors in terms of the contracts we actually have with the operators. So clearly all those measurements we are using to monitor performance and to pull up. But I would say that in terms of the subsidised services where we are seeing poor performance, we are working outside of the EP with those operators as the client in terms of working on a recovery plan to bring those back into full operation.
Thank you. Councillor Kilbane, supplementary.
No, thanks, Chair. There was quite a lot in that, so I've got sort of 3 supplementaries for different things that have just been raised. In terms of the monitoring cancellations by mileage lost, I mean, if that's unsatisfactory, then surely we should be looking to change the terms and conditions that we have with the operators at the first available opportunity, so that it's more concentrated on cancellations. In terms of the EP being a new relatively new partnership, my question around that is that the operational delivery group will not have any stakeholders on it. Why can't we have stakeholders on it to make sure that it does work according to the needs of the users? And finally, I'm really pleased to hear about the progress that's been made on the real-time screens, because you might remember, Michael, when you asked councillors to consult with residents as to the best place to locate those information points, by far the most overwhelming answer that I got anyway was don't bother, because they are the greatest work of fiction in the English language. I've even had a resident who's told me that they've had the bus on the app that the bus company provides you with, and they've watched as on the app the bus pulls up to their bus stop that they're stood at and then pulls away. But of course, no bus was ever visible to the person with the phone. So do we have some way of ensuring that these real-time screens are accurate, and that if the bus companies are not complying with it, there is some way of making them comply, or some penalty for not? Because it just causes so much trouble if people don't believe the screens, then they're worse than not having any screens.
Just while Michael's trying to find these notes, so I'll come to the point about the enhanced partnership and the operational delivery group. So when that was considered by executive in 21, that was something we specifically explored, and we got some legal advice on in the way the legislation is set out. And at the time, the monitoring officer was very clear that there are boards with roles for stakeholders on, and there are delivery groups, and Councillor Begorn will remember these conversations because he fought the case that there should be wider representation on them. But the advice was very clear that's not in accordance with the legislation or the way the FT have drafted the legislation. So the advice from the monitoring officer was we cannot do that element of the enhanced partnership operational delivery group having stakeholder representation on.
Just to add on that, the process, as you will recall, there was a consultation process in setting up the enhanced partnership. We took the decision we wanted an enhanced partnership as opposed to franchising, and the process was effectively set out in the legislation was that the operators could veto the proposed structure. And so the structure that was put forward was something which was negotiated with our local operators. If it was said at the time that if we changed or sort of change something away from what the operators approved, then it could delay us getting that funding and the partnership in place. And that was concern. This is going back to June, July time, I think.
Can you just clarify, Councillor Gunn, are you saying that the operators objected to there being stakeholders on the delivery group?
I'm not saying that they object. I'm saying that the model that was put forward by officers in consultation with the operator was in line with the legislation which you've just heard referred to.
Yeah, I mean, just supplemental to that, just picking up on James, after Councillor Gaughan's points, the DFT set down various guidelines for establishment of the enhanced bus partnerships. And actually, we've discussed with the DFT and with other local authorities, and we're actually unaware of any EP in the country where there's actually public representation on the EP board. Now, the point Councillor Gaughan makes around the establishment and the stakeholder approval, when any change is made to the EP itself, there is, if it is a material change, there is the opportunity for operators to raise objections to that. And operator objections, in the way that the DFT set up the opportunity to have an enhanced partnership, is that if an operator objects and that objection cannot be resolved to the satisfaction of the operator or operators, then they can block the enhanced partnership. So there is a mechanism within that, under the guidelines and the legal registration set up by the DFT and the government, to give the now that is just in relation to the establishment of the enhanced partnership and the way it operates. The EP forum was created to enable stakeholders, residents and elected members to scrutinise the operational delivery group. And I think it's really important that we recognise all of these groups are very new. We are working through the terms of reference for some of them still to get them absolutely correct. And I know that there is a marketing meeting tomorrow where they will agree their terms of reference, because one of the first actions that each group is given as it is established is to elect its own chair. And with the operational delivery group, that was elected as an independent person who is not a member of any operator or the local authority, but part of a national representation organisation in the bus industry. So a fully independent chair was elected, but it's really important that these groups work together and can scrutinise each other's activity. And it's also important that they take back feedback from each other and task each other with undertaking particular tasks. So we have a number of groups. We have the operational delivery group, which sits at the top. We have the marketing group. We have the passenger liaison group. We have a ticketing group, we have a performance group, and we have an EP forum. And it's really important that each of those feeds into the various bodies. And I see going forward that as each of those groups brings forward an action for the operational delivery group, the chair or a representative should be invited to attend operational delivery groups for the element of that item which they wish to discuss. So not for attendance at the whole meeting, but to attend for the specific item which may be discussed, because that then enables that opportunity to discuss with operators and the overall board, and to ensure that decision making is being done and being scrutinised by each party. So it's really important we have the strategic oversight of the BSIP delivery, and that each of these groups work together. And as I said earlier in the meeting, we're working really hard to establish all of these groups as quickly as possible. Some of them have proved a little bit more difficult to establish. Certainly in terms of the passenger liaison group and the EP forum, it's really important, as I said earlier, that we reach out to a very wide demographic of passenger. We reach out to passengers that we may not even have, it's not just about the passengers we have now, but it's why other people aren't using the bus. And we need to reach out to all of those groups. And as I said, we are working with the local transport strategy, local transport plan engagement team, and how they are dealing with engagement on that in terms of how we can do that. And also working with the accessibility officer to make sure we are reaching groups that require representation in terms of services for others. So there is still work, I recognise, with the enhanced partnership to do. It really is still very new, but it's important that it gets up and running very quickly. And we're working really hard to do that and to employ an EP officer to help do that, which would be a full-time role. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer, Michael. Neil, did you want to jump in with a comment on this subject area?
Yeah, just very quickly, Graham is our EP representative on the forum. But as explained to us in the early days of this, that the EP process would be an evolving process, that it is not a fixed, set in concrete situation. And so, yeah, we will continue to press for transparency. We will continue to press for accountability within the process. And we will continue to press that user groups, whether it's ourselves or other nominated user groups, have full access to this whole process. My other question would be that in the EP, there is £1.29 million set aside for the information screens. It would be useful to know how many screens £1.29 million will buy. There are roughly 1,000 bus stops in York.
Can you give us a rough answer to that? How's your math?
So I welcome, sorry, just to pick up on Neil's first point, I appreciate his input there. I think it's really important that we do engage with groups. As I say, I think I reflected in my answer earlier that we do see this as an evolving situation and we're really keen to engage with that. Clearly, there are some caveats within that, in that we do need to work within the legal framework which has been set up to establish them. So we do need to maintain that. But clearly within that framework, we need to make sure that we are engaging as widely and as open and transparent as that we need to be, because this is public money that we're investing to achieve goals for the city and for the people of the city. And it's important that that is scrutinised, because clearly that is something we recognise as officers that we need to ensure is happening. And I welcome tonight to come along and talk about many of the things that we are doing to achieve that.
Well, if for me, just on that, I mean, a lot of people are asking some of the things I was going to cover, but it's vital that as much scrutiny is involved in the EP process, because I remember the previous, it's not like for like, but we had the quality bus partnership before this. And I mean, I had a short spell on that, and it was a bit naff, really, in terms of scrutiny and democratic participation oversight. So I just really hope that this new model offers a tangible improvement in that regard. But Neil asked the question as well about how many.
Did you want me to come back on the EP at all? Are you? I'm happy to. I mean, I've got them. We see it as absolutely vital delivery. The passengers are at the top of this, and the prospective passengers are at the top of everything that BCP and the Enhanced Partnership should be delivering. We are set by some legal precedents to ensure that things are happening. In terms of delivering the BSIP, then there are a lot of stakeholders and a lot of people to answer to. So, passengers are the key one, because what they see, what they get is going to be absolutely key to delivery of this. And everything else should be a reflection of that, an answer to that request. Clearly, we need to report back to the DFT. We need to report back to the executive. We will be reporting over the whole programme. And one of the keys is why we have an overall programme that we've developed to reflect the delivery. But clearly, through the monitoring and evaluation, we'll be reflecting to the members in terms of the delivery of the programme and how that is progressing. And we will be looking for quick wins. We're looking to get some things onto the ground very quickly. There are some things that we can do quickly. There are some things that are much more complicated and will require member decisions and council decisions about how we reconcile some of the conflicting demands that they may bring in terms of road space or anything else. So there are a lot of questions that remain within delivery, and that the programme has been developed to reflect. So the quick wins can be delivered early in the programme, the later ones. But we do need to answer the DFT. We need to answer to the users. We need to answer to the members. We've got a lot of people we need to answer to, and it's important that we are reflecting as officers how we can make that as streamlined as possible. Because what we don't want to do is end up being officers just reporting to everybody. We need to ensure that in the way we report is consistent so that you get the same information the DfT are getting, the operators are getting, the stakeholders are getting. So I just wanted to reflect on that, because what I don't want to end up is just sitting, writing lots of reports about what I want to do, but I want to be open and transparent. So it's a little bit of.
I appreciate the length and honesty of your answers.
In terms of the real-time information screens, they're around about £100,000 each. That's
No, not that.
no, they're not that much. Sorry, Garden Bennett. I think we're purchasing around about 100 of them. That's the answer.
Right.
So the answer.
We're purchasing 100 of them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I've still got people very patiently waiting on this list. I've got Councillor Daubeny, then I've got Flick, and then I've got Councillor Pearson. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask officers about the forthcoming ending of government support in June, the so-called cliff edge, and then how that will affect or likely to affect bus services in York. So crystal ball time, perhaps. Thank you very much.
So, yeah, as we said earlier, government has provided significant support to the sector. That can't be underestimated. The level of support to maintain the sector has been important. In the last month, they obviously announced the extension of the support through to the end of June, and they also announced the continuation of the £2 fare. Those are all directly dealt with through with the government, with the operators. That's not something that we as the authority involved in. They reconcile that with the operators directly. In terms of what will happen at the end of March, I think, sorry, at the end of June, I think we have to reflect on what was going to happen at the end of October, which was scathing cuts to services across York. It would have been, pretty bad where we would have been in October. But we worked with operators really hard to reduce the impact of that as it came. Fortunately, further bus support was announced, which brought us through to the March deadline. During that period where we reflected on the damage that could be done to services, obviously we brought a paper to executive around stabilising the network and how we could support the network and some of the actions we could take as officers to help maintain the network and ensure that we have an opportunity to grow, because once we've lost services, it's much more difficult to bring them back. I think we can reflect on Poppleton. It's going to be challenging through that first few months to get it back. We have to really work hard, say we've got a marketing plan, working with the operator to bring it back, but it is going to be challenging to bring it back. Always starting a service from nothing is much more challenging. So bringing a service back. So maintaining the network has been absolutely key. I think, as I mentioned earlier this evening, as we got towards that March deadline, we would have expected operators to advise us 70 days prior to when they may make changes to services. So the Office of Road and Rail Regulator requires operators to give local authorities 70 days notice if there are going to be significant changes in services. That then gives us a 30-day window as a local authority to reflect on those changes, decide whether we want to do short-term tenders as we did with the 1213 and 412. And at 40 days, those changes become public and effectively become set in stone. And what we've seen so far, certainly moving up to March, is that none of those deadlines met. So when we've got close to those deadlines, we would expect to hear noises coming from the operators about changes. We don't expect them just to give us a carte blanche and say we're changing them tomorrow. We normally expect, because we have a dialogue with operators, they will be reflecting on market conditions to us, and we would get a feeling for where they may be going. But clearly, as we move towards that March deadline, didn't see that significant change in operation that we would have seen in October. So if we could continue the growth of services, which we, as I said, we are getting back to about 85%. It is a little bit fluctuating around the city and times a day of services, but overall it's around an 85% operation. I would reflect that if we can maintain that going forward, we should see limited changes at the end of this next period of government funding. But we don't know what the government are also going to do, because clearly it remains a cliff edge nationally in terms of what will happen. In York, I think we're quite well placed, but nationally there is, you see on the national papers about some areas are suffering very, very significant changes to services. And, with the BSIP funding we've got, with the government support we've had, I think we are as best placed as we can. But But as you said, it's not a crystal ball. I cannot say exactly what will happen. But clearly, a number of the factors which we saw in October have improved, and we would hope that that improvement continues.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Graham, was that a supplementary, quick one? Ish?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a quick point. Our understanding is that the DFT have been working on an alternative to the current funding system for some time. And this is why they keep deferring and extending the support period for 3 months, because they haven't sorted out the new system.
Think it could be public ownership by chance? Or...
I don't think that's their system, but all I'm saying is that I'm not sure that we're going to get another 3 months extension if they've in fact produced an alternative approach. And if they are doing that, they're going to need to give notice to operators and put things out much sooner. So that indicates that, you know, if it's going to happen from the 1st of July, then they're going to have to be doing something pretty soon now.
Yeah, thank you. That's interesting. Take care, Councillor Hook. Flick.
Thank you, Chair. So it's good to hear that bus priority measures are in fact a priority, but I'm just wondering what that means in real, practical, tangible terms, because the first major infrastructure project that we've seen is the Tadcaster Road project at a cost of £6 million. And yet, sadly, for whatever reason, that doesn't actually increase the amount of bus lanes by a single metre. So if we can't achieve it with a major project such as that, it's all very well saying, oh, well, yes, bus priority is a priority, but what does it mean? And then the second point I have is sort of sitting here, listening to all the detail. It strikes me that there's an inherent contradiction, because it's very clear that if we're going to stabilise the network and have, you know, a usable and attractive bus service, then it's about maximising backsides on seats, the maximum amount of journeys, very obvious. And yet in other parts of the council, for example, Climate Emergency Scrutiny Committee, we keep hearing about how everybody will travel less across all modes. So I just wanted to sort of raise that as a, you know, fundamental contradiction really in terms of aims and objectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Flick. Any comments? Sorry.
Do you want to come back? Just to say, I mean, Tadcaster Road isn't a core element of the BSIP scheme. So just to clarify, Tadcaster Road is part of the TCF programme and a maintenance programme which the council are delivering, and the TCF fund has obviously been agreed with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority in terms of what is delivering and with members. So I can't comment on Tadcaster Road directly other than to clarify that it's not part of the BSIP programme. But clearly we have got a number of corridors that are part of the BSIP programme, as I outlined earlier, and also a tactical looking at the city centre itself, which we recognise there are elements around moving buses through the city centre and getting to the station, which we do need to address. And that they are currently part of a study which is with consultants at the moment. We would expect to report soon. In terms of tactical measures, then not only do we have the core corridors, which are the 3 core corridors, and the city centre improvements, but we have got a small element of tactical to deal with short-term issues. So where we may have an issue on the network which is causing a problem to operators, we have a small element of tactical funding to deliver those as well.
Thank you. I think Councillor Dave Taylor, you had a supplementary then, Councillor.
Yeah, so chipping in on the point made by Ms Williams, COVID has been a dreadful thing. An awful lot of people have died. But one of the good things which has come out of COVID is that it's brought forward the fact that people can work from home and contribute in meetings via Zoom and Microsoft technology. So that is a good thing. And if that means fewer people are travelling, that's reducing congestion. It does have a bit of a negative impact on bus patronage, of course. The other point I wanted to come back to was probably my initial point about transparency is, Michael, you've talked about the detail of your programme, but that detail has not been shared. Can it be shared? Is there any reason why it cannot be shared with the bus forum? And if that's the problem now, then when will that change?
Sorry, can you just repeat that? Sorry. What was the
Sorry,
document you wanted to say?
Michael spoke earlier about the detail programme. And we have, you know, a précis of the detail of the.
Yeah,
programme.
I have no
It's-
issue with sharing that.
Okay.
It's, you know, as far as I'm concerned, it's a public document, that detailed plan. It's about the level of information people want. So
That's marvellous. Thank you very much.
I don't think I have a concern about that.
Thank you.
So that could be found online now if somebody searched hard enough.
I don't know whether it's online now, but I'm certainly happy to put it online or share it with this committee or bring it to a future meeting.
I was going to say, one of the issues we had with it was because it is very detailed, it's multiple lined. The web services had difficulty making it of a size that was readable on the internet. So that's why
Right.
we've only got an abbreviated version here. But clearly, from an operational point of view for officers and for delivery, we've got a very detailed line by line. We are currently going through a revision of that. So just we had a revision meeting yesterday. So as soon as we've done that through that further iteration, I have no problem with sharing that. I obviously want to give the members as up-to-date information as I've got in
Yeah.
terms of delivery. So that's fine.
It's probably a limited audience of people who want to read all that detail, but if we could share it with our friends at the end of the table, I think that would be.
And just to pick up, so obviously some of the key things in there are the delivery of the Wigginton Road corridor, are the delivery of the Fulford Road corridor, and our delivery of the Heslington Road, University Road corridor. They're some of the key corridor interventions that we're going to make, along with the city centre and its approaches, which I say is those we are working through the studies. We're well aware that to deliver those within the BSIP timetable is challenging. So we will be looking to deliver those reports. We are doing consultancy reports very quickly so that we can actually bring that back to members as soon as possible to actually have open the discussion around those corridors and how they may be reflected in terms of what members want to see.
Thank you.
Sorry, just to add, within Annex A, there are some, those are obviously listed, but there are other sort of, there's small scale ones as well. So yes, there's some big corridor schemes to look at, but also there's a sort of opportunities pot of money at the bottom of Annex A, which talks about opportunities to invest in, you know, if there's something that's not on one of those corridors, a small scale investment would make a big difference for bus priority and get buses through quicker, then that's what that pot of money is intended to be used for. So it's not just those three, there is a sort of quick wins, pinch points type approach citywide.
Thank you. And thanks also for agreeing to share that more detailed document. It was going to be a recommendation I put forward after you first raised it earlier on. Councillor Kilbane, and then we'll go to Councillor Pearson.
No, thanks, Chair. My question is supplementary to the corridor question. So looking at those capital projects on what will be page 11, I guess, so the Schedule 5 on the report. Wigginton Road, 1 kilometre, Fulford Road, 1.2 kilometres and 500 metres for somewhere in Heslington Road, University Road. I'm not sure of the reference to Wigginton Road in that one, but maybe you can explain. But so are we saying that we're going to reallocate road space to buses for a corridor a kilometre long, 1.2 kilometres long, 500 metres long? Is that what we're talking about? Or are we going to increase the width of the road so that there's a free run for buses for those? What does that actually mean in practice?
So actually identifying the measures within those. So those corridors have been identified as experiencing specific problems relating to liability and bus priorities. The next stage is to take those away for consultants to work through them in detail and to come back with a detailed proposals for consideration in terms of how we may address the issues that we're seeing. So whilst we talk there around a total length of 1 kilometre, that may not be just 1 kilometre from point A to point B. It may be that it's a 50-metre section here, it's this traffic junction here, and then it's another 250 metres further on, etc., etc. So this isn't just about saying we're only going to deal with 1 kilometre. We will deal with where the bottlenecks are, where the congestion points are, and where the improvements can be made. And obviously we will work with wider authority in terms of how that also delivered for cycling and walking, etc. So it's not just working in isolation. We will be looking to work across the authority in terms of where we may get benefits for others. But obviously we need to reflect within this where we get bus improvements. And that'll be the key thing that will be monitored against by the DFT.
I think one of the things I'm just going to add is the identification of those corridors was actually led by the operators. So they identified, and they've got quite sophisticated sort of information on where buses are delayed, where the pinch points are, where they get those problems. So it was with them that we produced and identified those locations.
So Kilbane, last supplementary.
So just for clarity though, what that will mean in practice is either the reallocation or the reprioritization of road space for sustainable travel. So just for clarification, what that will mean in practice is the reallocation or the reprioritization of road space for sustainable travel.
Yes, or the you know, some of the bus gating measures we've got elsewhere in the city stop car traffic to allow the bus through. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Michael, for your report. I was wondering if you could talk about what benchmarking you've done with other authorities. So, for example, how many other authorities have actually benefited from bus service improvement plan funding? How are they using theirs? And if there are authorities that haven't benefited from this funding, how the heck are they coping?
Only because it's on the tip of my tongue. I know that of all the transport authorities in England, because I'm pretty sure BSIP just applies to England, but of all the transport authorities, it was just less than 40% that got funding. So we are in the top 40% that got funding from that perspective. So that's quite significant in that sense. I think just on the how other places doing, the fact that the bus transformation team wanted to come to York to see what was going on says that we're doing quite well, actually, as our opening speakers mentioned. You know, with that government funding, things are generally surviving.
Yeah, I mean, just reflecting on what James said, I mean, the bus reform team, the Department of Transport, came to York not because they saw as a problem that they had, but they saw as a pinnacle of where we can sort of get to in terms of what we can achieve through BSIP. And, you know, they came to see what effectively we can do to support other authorities. So I think we need to reflect on that our authority, the DFT judge, has having a very ambitious programme and one that they feel we can deliver. And we'll be working with stakeholders to make sure that actually happens and it comes to the benefit of the passengers, which is absolutely at the heart of everything we're doing in terms of the BSIP delivery programme. So in terms of benchmarking, obviously the DFT have done a lot of benchmarking to achieve where they've actually allocated funding. So again, we must reflect on the quality of the original BSIP request that was made and the BSIP as it stands from October sort of 21, because that clearly was a document which the DFT reflected upon and felt it did set within the top 40% of authorities within the UK. So I think, you know, we are a member of a forum within the DFT where we do get updates from other authorities. Again, because BSIP funding is really new, some authorities haven't even got their funding yet. The last time I attended a meeting, they reflected on whilst, as James said, 40% of authorities got BSIP funding. Certainly, as of 2 months ago, when I last had an update from the DFT in relation to that, only around 50% had actually achieved the point of actually getting the funding in the door, ready for delivery. So again, we must reflect that we've been really pragmatic and efficient in getting the funding delivered, so we can now get on to delivery. Because without that funding, we would be in a very different position. We'd be having a very different discussion tonight, because buses have been in a really challenging position, and the BSIP now gives us an opportunity to not just stabilise but to grow the network. And I think within the BSIP, through both the physical infrastructure measures, but through the behaviour change we can deliver and through the fare support that we can bring, particularly to young people, to really instill a behaviour change from an early age. And that has to be the key. We need to get people onto the bus at an early age and make them stay there. And I think through working with the wider team, working with the DFT, working with our consultants and working with the stakeholders and passengers, it's going to be really important that we deliver on all of those things. It's a huge challenge. I do not underestimate it, but we are as an authority ready to take that challenge, and we need to work really hard to deliver on it now.
Thank you. I'd like to close with a couple of questions related to accessibility, if I may. So there's been some talk of reaching out to new audiences, and that's all grand, but I'm sat here thinking about pre-existing audiences who might struggle to use these services even if they want to. And I know we've got all of these electric buses coming on board, which is great. Is it right that these buses only have one space for wheelchairs, or not?
So, yeah, we do mention the Department of Transport quite a lot in this meeting because they're a big funder of what we're doing. And as the funder, obviously, they set the specification for many of the things. We have some flexibility and we can encourage different things, but ultimately, in order to achieve that. And again, I think we need to reflect on York being really successful in securing this BSIP funding and, the match funding, which first, if we think about first, we're going to take that a different meeting, but first have provided significant financial contributions to both purchasing the buses, which I think at the moment, the Zebra relies about 75% of the funding, and the operator brings in the additional match funding. But clearly, in terms of updating their own depot in order to have the infrastructure ready for delivery of the buses, and with the additional funding we've got, that will give us extra buses and means that depot will become fully electric when it is converted. In terms of the sales space, obviously the DFT defined the specification for the Zebra vehicles, and that does define one dedicated wheelchair space within it and one multi-use space, which is effectively the space which is available for either a person with a buggy or with a wheelchair as a so they defined that. In order to secure the funding, obviously they wouldn't look to change that specification. And in order to secure the funding, then we've continued with that, with their defined specification relating to that. So it is two spaces ultimately, but one defined, one is a multi-use space within the vehicle.
Right, thanks for your answer. Flick, were you indicating, forgive me?
Yeah, it's okay, I will come back on.
Okay. Am I right in thinking there was a city centre bus access study commissioned last year? Has that been reported back on yet? Who was involved in it? Operators, users?
Not sure which one it is.
Yeah, so that was commissioned. It hasn't reported back yet. It's close to reporting back. I think we had a briefing, an initial findings briefing last month, I think, as a sort of, this is where we've got to. Yes, that works with operators, is my understanding, looking at how bus routes in the city centre could potentially operate better. So it's not part of BSIP. I think it was something we commissioned before BSIP was dreamt of, probably.
So who's leading on that? Who's doing the work? Is it some consultant?
It's an external consultancy. Is it? I wouldn't name it, so I might get it wrong. I think it was. Yeah. No, I'm not. But yeah, it's external consultancy. Who it is doesn't matter.
Are they liaising with user groups, residents as part of that?
At this stage, I think what they've done is work with operators. I think there's a phase. Sorry, they've done the work with operators. There is a phase, I think, of consultation to come afterwards, which is around engagement, around what they've found and proposed, and engaging with users as part of that.
Right. Okay. Yeah, seems slightly back to front in my opinion, but they're the experts, I suppose. Flick, go on.
Thank you. Yeah, since we are actually now talking about Zebra, for me, another very important issue is about automated ramps. Because again, this goes to bus service, running to time. It takes a lot less time to board with an automatic ramp than it does when the driver has to leave the cab to manually deploy the ramp. And that is actually, a barrier to many disabled people, well, specifically in this case, wheelchair users, actually wanting to use the buses because, I've had it numerous times. You'll get a lot of performative watch checking by other passengers. And of course, the position you're required to be in on the bus means that you are looking at a sea of other people. And in fact, when the council had its big conversation on the climate strategy, there was a specific group for disabled people. And there were some people there that are not actually met before. So it was nice, you know, not to see the usual suspects. And what actually came up in that was there were a couple of people who said they would actually consider using buses, but because they'd not done it since they'd become wheelchair users, they felt very unsure and uncertain. And it was suggested that we might ask the operators to stage an event at the depot to actually allow people to try it out. Because I know when I first became a wheelchair user, that was something that I was very nervous of. And I actually got my brother to chalk out the measurements in my yard so that I could actually practice reversing into the space, because I knew I'd have loads of people looking at me. So I think that would be, you know, a huge opportunity if that could be actually done. And it was in the report, but, you know, there's been no mention of it since. Thank you.
So obviously we see access to public transport services is absolutely key. Obviously the introduction of castle curbs, which we recognise aren't at all stops at the moment, but is something again through BSIP and these corridor studies. These corridor studies aren't about big physical interventions, but they also include smaller interventions, which can include improvements to the bus stops, which is clearly something that we need to ensure that they do deliver, because it is all about the journey of the person from the door to door and their full journey experience and the accessibility to the service. So we need to make sure part of what this delivers is the bus stop, which is practical for the low floor bus to actually access the stop, that it can access the stop first time, every time, which is one of the other key elements. Obviously, the deployment of ramps and the proximity of castle curves requires the bus to pull up in a specific position in order to deploy its ramp, whether it's manual or electric. So it's absolutely key that we make sure that part of the works that we're doing through each of these corridors and the tactical interventions and the city centre interventions enable to a bus to get to the right point each time and every time to ensure that it can facilitate the passengers to move between the curb and the bus. In terms of the use of electric ramps, that's something we have discussed with the DfT. It isn't a requirement of the specification of the zebra buses, which are being introduced. The reasons that are given for that are that they are found to be intrinsically unreliable. They quite often suffer damage or mechanical failing. And so that the technology at the moment is not seen to be sufficient to ensure that the bus remains in service for the required length of time, in that when they are deployed, they've either suffered damage or they're not in an operational position. So I think it's really important that we ensure that we've got the right technology where we're to deploy ramps going forward in the future when the opportunity to procure additional further buses comes along. We need to make sure the technology is right and that we don't actually compromise the bus service reliability if vehicles are taken off the road, which by suffering a defect such as that. So I recognise the concerns of FLIG. I think it's something we need to work forward to address in terms of how we can improve that. It's not something we can currently do through the Zebra initiative.
Thank you.
Unfortunately.
You have another comment?
Yeah, I mean, that's very disappointing to hear, because in a previous life back in London in 2001, I was in charge of an access project that actually worked with bus depots in West London on exactly that. And, you know, that's like 22 years ago. So if the technology hasn't improved, you know, any in that time, I think that's, you know, unfortunately a statement as to what priority disabled people are given.
I hear you. I'd be inclined to agree. I mean, I do have one more question in this sort of area, if I may. And it sort of ties into sort of travel behaviour change. But in this case, for staff running these services rather than potential customers, there's obviously money set aside for travel behaviour change in the BSIP, but might that include, dare I say, mandatory training in terms of access,
helping users feel comfortable, not making them feel like an inconvenience. I'm sure there's some training that takes place at the minute because some companies are a bit better than others, but what are we looking like in terms of that?
I can't remember off the top of my head, and others around the table might do better than me at this. But from memory, I think we've made that commitment about training for bus drivers in the city centre access plan. I think it's in there, but I might be wrong, but that's just from memory. But I think we have made that commitment to look at that through the, so that bus drivers get that as a piece of training, but I'll double check on that.
Yeah, thank you, James. Neil?
Yeah, I'm sure, as you guys are already aware, the better bus companies have extensive training and ensure the passenger experience is maximised. But whether that is true across the piece, whether the smaller bus companies comply, it's hard to say.
Yeah, it should be universal, really, because it just takes one bad experience to put someone off forever, doesn't it? Anyway, I don't want to get into ranting territory. I mean, we've been going for nearly 2 hours. We've covered all sorts of ground. I think we could go for another 4 if we really, really wanted to. Are there any burning questions or even recommendations that people might want to put forward? We have had a commitment to share the more detailed documentation behind the BSIP, which has been agreed. I don't know if we need to make it a formal recommendation. If the position changes, it's on camera. James?
I was going to say, I think the one recommendation, which I think there probably is work for officers to do, is around the contracts and whether mileage is the right measure of bus performance. Recognising the point that the concurrent effect of 2 or 3 cancellations has on the perception of that as a service. I think there probably is some work to go away and look at how bus performance is measured, and whether that's a topic for a scrutiny to pick up and run with and do a piece of scrutiny work on, whether it's a recommendation that you want off, you want the executive to look at it, is obviously for members to decide. But I think that is something that I've taken away from tonight. It's something we should probably look at. Whether you agree or not, of course, is members.
No, to be fair, I think it's a really sound suggestion. I'm just thinking of the best place for it, really. Either the executive member or a future E&P meeting, but that'll be, well, both of them be a while off because we've got elections coming up. Any views from colleagues?
I have a simple recommendation, which I think might be described as a quick win, would be to facilitate the bus companies to enact opportunity for wheelchair users to practice getting on and off a bus and encourage them to do so. And that might give them the confidence to do that and bring them back to the bus. The bus companies might get some good publicity out of offering that service as well. Perhaps we could facilitate that. I think that would be a pretty simple recommendation. And that shouldn't be too difficult to do.
Yeah, and that follows on from what Flick was raising before. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I like that. Any objections? Councillor De Gaunt? Not an objection, I'm sure.
Just another point that I wonder if obviously there's partners, was it 40 around the country authorities that we've got an enhanced partnership?
It's more than that. It's more than that. It's
38%. I think I said
38. You've got BSIP. You can have an enhanced partnership if you haven't got BSIP under the bus. So if you'll have an enhanced partnership with agents, you're becoming so.
Sorry, I just was a thought about trying to share best practice on reliability. Just if we can ensure that colleagues have contacts with other authorities about if there are other authorities that have found an effective way of monitoring and improving reliability with their operators. I know every operator is different in terms of the makeup of who the operators are and so on, but I think that is a key key factor in terms of building confidence and people going back on the buses is to address that reliability.
So is this you asking this committee to share that best practice, or is it a
No,
recommendation
I'm-
to the executive member for
suggesting-
transport by the executive member for transport?
And officers to look at that as a good step forward in a way, in terms of trying to understand if there are best practice examples from elsewhere. in the
Yeah,
country
I mean,
that-
it wouldn't do any harm if it's if it's an exercise that's meaningfully entertained. Yeah, I'm
It could be,
comfortable with that.
you know, a desk operation and just reading the literature and so on, and coming back with some ideas of what seems to work elsewhere.
Yeah, okay.
Chair,
Councillor Kilbane,
Chair, if I
yeah.
can, I mean, essentially what we're trying to do is move away from the mileage lost measure of reliability. So if that could be the recommendation, that we look at ways of moving away from that as a way of measuring reliability, which would include what the executive member for transport has just suggested. Can I also add a recommendation that we have some robust measures around the accuracy of real-time information? Because that is another sore point for many users. So that we're quite robust in the way that we measure how accurate the information that the bus companies are providing, and we could even look at naming and shaming those who are not being 100% open about it.
Thank you, Councillor Kilbane. Neil?
If it's request time.
Request that you put your microphone on first.
I would like to make a request, please, on behalf of the bus forum, as demonstrated by the representative of First at our last bus forum meeting. They have daily passenger data, patronage data available to them. Clearly, it's the meat and grist of their business. They monitor this data daily. We would like to see that data available publicly, so that we have some basis of fact on which to make some value judgments.
I mean, I think this.
Sorry, you want me to just pick up there?
Well, just go on,
Just
briefly, please.
Sorry, I know, yeah. That information on passenger and bus reliability is available under the Bus Transport Act 2017, and that data is freely available on the Bus Open Data Platform BODS. So if anyone wants to look at it, it's readily available on an updated basis by all operators. So that's a national database that provides information for York.
Okay.
To do that.
I appreciate the response, but we've got shaking heads, so I'd like to try and get to the bottom of this if at all possible.
Yeah,
in
just
a
a
fast
quick
fashion.
comment. I mean,
Yeah.
I do get emails from the open data. And as far as I can see, it's only set up for operators and local authorities. There doesn't seem to be any provision on it for anyone else to access the information. Certainly, if there is, it's certainly not clear from anything I've received.
Might you have a reply to that, Michael?
I can't comment on the accessibility of the BODS data. As far as I'm aware, it is a freely accessible system, and that's where we understand anyone can look at that data if they wish to. So I'd have to go back and look at how the actual access of it. But also just to, it is freely available, and organisations that are non-profit can also get it through the innovation, or I can share these links if people would like those sharing.
Can you send us the information about that, then, Michael?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I might need a bit of help here, colleagues. So we have a few recommendations. I think best place, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong or challenge me if you think it's worth it, but I think the first one is to ask operators to hold, I don't know what they want to call them, but days, initiatives, time for people to feel comfortable with getting on and off their vehicles if they have access needs or requirements. I think if you keep it open, then it doesn't just limit it to wheelchairs, it could include any other issues really. Would it be the case that we'd have to recommend that to the executive member? Is that? Because he's not going to be around much longer, is he?
to investigate it.
Only joking, councillor Le Gordon, yeah.
In terms of wording, can we word it that we ask the officers to facilitate this with the bus companies?
Can we? You'd have to forgive me. I still feel fairly green to the chair role.
In terms of the wording of it.
Okay, well, in that case, if we're not sure, we'll send that to the executive member, whoever that may be, by the time that comes around through the council sausage machine.
Probably word it in such a way that you're asking the new administration to consider it. You might, you're asking the new executive to consider the request and officers to note it so that we can facilitate it if possible. But the formal request has to go to the decision makers.
Yeah, I'm good with that. Thank you, James. And then we had a recommendation from councillor Kilbane, which I think everyone agreed with. We need to look at the robustness of how accurate these real-time information monitors are. I mean, again, sent to the executive member of the time for officers to note as well. And included with that, there was, yes, reviewing how we look at performance monitoring, reliability in the contracts that we have. I'd see that almost as a collective piece of work with the previous recommendation. Appreciate everybody's patience here. Have I missed anything?
There was a request that we make data available to the number of bus users on a daily, weekly basis when it comes to these reports.
I mean, I'm fine with that. It sounds like it's the companies that might be a bit awkward about it. But we can ask the executive member to make that request. No objections? Cool. Well, we got there. Thank you, everybody. For one item, we've covered all sorts of ground, and as I say, we could have had plenty more. I appreciate everybody's patience and input, and not that I've got any favourites, but I'd like to say a special thank you to you, Michael. You've put in a real shift with your answers tonight. It is appreciated. And I know officers, including James, have had quite a long day, including other public meetings. So that essentially brings us to the end of the meeting, because there's no other agenda items outside of urgent business, and there isn't any. But I just want to say, last meeting of this committee while I'm chair. Who knows who'll be chairing it after May. Thank you, colleagues. It's been a genuine pleasure. I think we've had some tasty meetings, and we've actually got some decent recommendations out of some of the items we've covered. And I wish you all the best for whatever happens in May. And I hope that whatever happens, you can have happy professional and political lives moving forward. Thanks, everyone. Councillor Pearson.
Thanks, Chair. I've had the pleasure of being on this committee for all 4 years of being a councillor. I just want to say a big thanks to Ange for all the work she's done over those 4 years. Thank you.
Absolutely great shout. Yeah, good call. Thank you, Ange. Have a good night, everyone. Cheers.